Good morning. My name is Susan Chapman, and I am wanting this morning to talk with you a little bit about the fundamental principles of mindful communication that I developed in my book, The 5 Keys to Mindful Communication. Just a moment to explain my appearance. I've just completed 7 months of cancer treatment, so I'm rejoicing that a little bit of hair is returning. But actually, it's the best hairdo I've ever had. So, as people who know me, my hair tends to be a bit wild. Welcome. And what I'd like to talk about in particular is this kind of organizing principle called, that we use the 3 traffic lights for that. In terms of the flow of communication, think of the flow of communication as being similar to the flow of traffic. And we have the experience of being open and connected where communication is flowing freely. And so we symbolize that as the green light. And then we also know what it's like for communication to break down. And this is really where a lot of collisions occur. And that's why we really want to learn how to pay attention to the red light. What happens? What should we do when communication breaks down? And finally, we have an interesting idea, a little introduction to a new idea, which is that the more mindful we are, the more compassionate we are with our own experience and with that of the pain of breakdown, communication breakdown, we gradually become more aware of what we call this yellow light or the yellow zone, and what occurs within that kind of reactive experience where we feel embarrassed or vulnerable or hurt, disappointed. So I want to just give a broad introduction to how we work with that. First of all, we have the idea of a green zone, which is to have a group of friends with whom we feel safe and with whom we make agreements about how we're going to communicate, because we really are training ourselves or untraining ourselves from habits that are very easily triggered in an environment that has no container or boundaries. So a green zone is a container for authentic communication, where we make an agreement about not harming ourselves or each other with our words, but at the same time a place where we can explore our communication patterns. So within a green zone, there are basically 3 practices that are, cross over from the social to the spiritual, because truly authentic spirituality really is about how we communicate with ourselves, how we communicate with each other, but how we listen, and how we listen to the way that our body speaks to us. I learned very much that lesson during my cancer journey. How we listen to our emotions, how we receive and listen and make room for our emotions, how we listen to our mind. This is why a form of meditation practice is kind of an essential part of mindful communication, because really what meditation is listening to our body, to our heart, to our mind. So let me just kind of go back to the idea of the 3 lights. The 3 lights symbolize essentially 3 stages or 3 kinds of practice. The first practice is the practice of mindfulness. And again, the green light is the training in mindfulness. So mindfulness is always about returning to the present moment. That's essentially what all mindfulness training is about, how to let go of distraction and come back and pay attention. And so for us, mindfulness is all of the practices of noticing the present moment. And that's what the green light symbolizes. When we talk about green light, that kind of openness is always about returning to the present moment. And there are all kinds of ways that that green light flashes to us. They're not always pleasant, I mean, it could be the song of a bird, it could be the tears of a child, it could be your dog bites you. I mean, it's like all kinds of things that are coming back. And the training is to come back and not to, it's like to interrupt the kind of train of thought we were on and come back and have a fresh start. So a lot of the language for coming back to the present moment includes having being willing to bear witness to what's happening with us in our body, in our heart, in our mind, and noticing the bridge of connection that is always there when we're in the present moment. The present moment is a moment of connection. And it might be very fleeting, but in that moment there is no barrier between ourselves and the person we're with or the environment we're in, including the environment of our body, the tender quality of our heart, our natural heart, our tender heart. And so it's an openness. Our mind is open. It's not attached to an opinion, for instance. It's really that moment of fresh information. So training in mindfulness is using the green light as a symbol of interrupting and coming back to the present moment. Again, just a symbolic flash, very brief. Like at the moment I see a little bird landing outside, kind of pecking away at some grass. That would be my green light flash. So the second training is the training in compassion. And this is really very, very important. That when we talk about the red light, when we talk about communication breakdown, the place where we learn about that is within our own being. What does it feel like? Even in my meditation, when I start repeating a memory that triggers me to be angry or triggers me to feel that I'm not good enough or triggers me to be starting to crave for an addiction. Those are the internal red lights. And in our meditation or in our moment, our day-to-day practice, instead of reacting to those triggers and shutting down in a habitual way, we notice how it feels in our body. Tension, our body tightens. And that's our body shutting down. The communication is shutting down. It's giving us a distress signal. When our heart shuts down, then the tender emotions and the tender kind of intelligence of the heart is replaced by reactive, anger, revenge, addiction, a lot of these very painful emotional reactions that we're very familiar with. Those are secondary, and they're signals that the light is turned red within ourselves. And the signals will come from our body, they come from our emotions, but they also come from our mind, because of course everything is synchronized, and our mind will be fixating on a feeling of I'm separate from you, us and them, and we'll rapidly create storylines that build upon that theme. So it's a sense of that bridge of connection has gone down. And now we have very, very familiar patterns that will lead us into what we call the red zone. A red zone is an environment, a communication environment, where we find other people who agree with those stories. It's like that viral phenomena where our negativity gets amplified and supported and endorsed by other people. And that's very dangerous, and that's what we call the red zone. So we can talk about that. But what's really important is the practice of compassion. That's the practice that we bring to our suffering. So when our body is tightening, when our heart is shutting down with these painful emotions, and when our mind is becoming trapped in these fixated stories, the appropriate response is to stop. Just like in traffic, we don't want to go out and cause harm. And pause and create room to acknowledge I am suffering. Or if it's our friend, you are suffering. But we're not going to jump on that train of thought and go with where that suffering could lead, which is to greater suffering. So compassion for the experience of communication shutdown, beginning with our body, but extending to others, is a hugely important practice in mindful communication. The mindfulness brings us to the present moment, cuts through our distracted or fixated ideas, but the compassion is about how do we relate to suffering, which we often don't recognize it as suffering. We recognize it as, wait till I tell you what he did to me. And yes, there is room for processing, but that processing needs to be in a safe space, a green zone, so that we can continue to bring that pain back to compassion. So the third practice, which you could say is a little more advanced, is the practice of working with the yellow light. The yellow light is being able to understand that red light experience so well that we begin to recognize what that trigger consists of. It's like bringing a microscope to that moment when communication shuts down. It could be that someone else has hurt us or cut us off, and that feeling of what's wrong with me, it's basically self-doubt. It's a form of self-doubt. And it also triggers a tremendous fear that if anyone really got to know me, they would see there's something wrong with me. That sense of what did I do to make this happen? It's really an early childhood traumatic memory. And so when we're hurt, when we're disappointed, when we're irritated, there is a possibility of creating some space for that mindfully compassionate environment to welcome that feeling, that fear that there's something wrong with me, and not buy into it. Instead of buying into it, we make room for it to emerge, and we offer a restorative alternative. So again, this is a process of healing, and it demonstrates that communication with ourselves and with each other is not only a social practice that enriches our relationships, it's not only a spiritual practice that reconnects us with the basic sanity and goodness within us and our spiritual understandings. but it's also a healing process. We heal in dialogue with others. So within a green zone, we practice those three trainings: the mindfulness, the compassion, and the insight, and the welcoming of tender fears. And that combination of those three things, training with each other in a green zone, then enables us to go into our daily life and recognize when the light is green, when it's red, when it's yellow. And that gives us tremendous power, because those triggers can really pull us, as I said, into habitual patterns. And if we're in an environment where those are supported, then it becomes very, very difficult to interrupt them. So again, we want to have a safe container in which to practice. This has been part of spiritual traditions for thousands of years. You know that you have a retreat environment or some kind of community in which there are some guidelines, some precepts, some guidelines around ethics, ethical speech. So in this case, our guideline is, when the light is green, go, connect, recognize that, be interrupted, come back to the present moment. When the light is red, stop, pause, feel the pain, bear witness to the suffering, recognize this is pain, and interrupt the reaction. Bring compassion to that pain. When the light is yellow, know that there is a hidden fear, a hidden self-doubt emerging, and make room for that, because in the environment of the green zone, we can discover that that hidden fear is not based on reality. It's a memory of a broken connection at a time when we did not have the compassionate environment to understand it. So we have a restorative process within the dialogue where we can bring it into our communication and discover there's no basis for it. So that's really, to me, the most important principles of this practice. I know that there are the 5 keys, but essentially they all break down to 5 ways of applying these important principles. And you'll find that in my book, which I am happy to elaborate upon at some point. But I think really you've got the basic idea here. So I wanted to thank you so much for your patience listening to me, and I hope this is helpful to you. And I feel that more than ever, the power and importance of communication, communicating with heart, communicating with presence, communicating with insight, and creating green zones wherever you are, training in them with your friends, and then creating them in your families and your workplaces is, it's really, you could say it's like the tapestry of an alternative society that's growing like my hair, like springtime, coming up with a fresh new way of being together as a global community. So again, thanks so much, and I send you love and all my best wishes for how your day is going today. Take care.